There are many people who have Ouija boards in their closet and have never used them. When I was 16, I discovered Ouija boards and asked my parents if we had one. My mother said yes. She did have one hidden someplace in the closet with all the board games, which was in the basement beside the laundry room. The little closet containing a large amount of my parents' old belongings. I was intrigued to try using a Ouija board because I was slightly superstitious. So I had my mom assist me in digging through this closet without disrupting the integrity and neatness with which she sorted everything in. There. And lo and behold, eventually she finds this old dusty box that simply said Ouija and had two hands holding the piece that moves around the board called the planchette. Even though my mom stated they'd only used it a handful times, the box was breaking apart on the sides. The first thing I did was text a few of my friends to come use the Ouija board with me that weekend when I'd be home alone to make it scarier. My buddy Liam, who was 17, had a car. So he picked up my friend Jack and they came immediately over. It was after 9 p.m. It was dark outside and my parents were gone for a couple of nights. My 2-year-old brother Adam was also home. So I invited him to join us. We were going to play on the floor of the loft, which had been transformed into my bedroom. We turned down the lights, then turned on a flashlight and placed it on the floor in the corner of the room, pointing towards the board. All 4 of us sat on one side of the board, holding the planchette, and began asking questions. None of us had done this before, so we asked basic questions. When I said, "If there's someone there, move the planchette," it began to move to the word yes for the first time. Adam asked how old you were, and the planchette moved from 6 to 77. We looked at each other, and while I suspected one of them was moving it, and I'm sure the others did as well, we all played along and didn't break immersion. Eventually, I asked the board, "Are you a demon?" And the planchette moved to the word yes. At this point, we all laughed and broke immersion, knowing one of us was messing around at that moment. The flashlight went out and we all stopped laughing and were terrified. Who did that? Someone questioned, although it was plainly none of us. The flashlight was all the way in the corner, so I crawled to get it and started pressing the button, but it wouldn't turn back on. I turned on my bedroom lamp and saw the shocked expressions on my friends' and brothers' faces. I said it was the most terrifying moment for the battery to die, but part of me believed it wasn't a coincidence that we stopped playing after that moment and even left my room and went to the backyard because we were all freaked out being in the house at that moment. I had to sleep in that room that night, and when my friends left and Adam eventually went to sleep, I knew I had to as well. So I put the Ouija board back in the box and brought it downstairs out of my room. I just felt strange, sleeping in the same room as it that night. So as soon as I turned off the light, I just tried to sleep right away instead of sitting on my phone for an hour or whatever, like I usually do. As I was finally drifting off into a half-sleep state, something in my closet fell over. I instantly stood up and glanced in the direction of the closet door. I switched on the bedside lamp and walked over to the closet. It was a tiny walk-in closet where I stored some of my clothing. There was a light switch on the exterior of the closet that turned on a single light bulb inside. I turned it on and peered down at the crack at the bottom of the door. There were what appeared to be 2 shadows cast by feet on the other side of the door. As soon as I saw this, I started screaming, Adam, and ran to his room. I explained what I had just seen to him and led him to my room to show him. When he arrived, the light in the closet was still on, but the shadows at the bottom of the door were gone. I opened the door. There was no one in the closet, but there was something on the floor. It was a wooden box that I made in arts and crafts to hold childhood mementos. But it somehow fell over, and the contents spilled onto the floor. There was no draft in the world that could have knocked that over. It made no logical sense. That night, the next, and for the next week, I slept in my parents' bed. I slept in the guest bedroom for a while before returning to my own bed, but I'll never forget that night. I haven't touched a Ouija board since. I had never used a Ouija board until I was in my mid-20s. It had never piqued my curiosity. But my friend George was briefly conversing with a lady who was into that type of stuff. Her name was Mandy. She was into exploring abandoned and allegedly haunted places. And one day he invited me to go with them and her friend to this apparently haunted abandoned house about a half-hour drive away. He guaranteed me the friend was cute in order to entice me to go. I didn't have anything going on that night, so I said, why not, we would be doing this late at night. George picked me up first around 11 p.m. and then we drove to pick up the girls from this park. I'd already met Mandy, but not her friend Carly. Her friend Carly had red hair, a nose ring, and a sleeve on her right arm. Mandy had already been to this house before, and she said it was high in activity, a term I'd never heard before, but obviously could put together what she meant. I grinned a little when she said that, because I honestly chuckled to myself. I don't believe in the paranormal, so I thought it amusing. Mandy brought this big bag with her, so I asked what was inside during the drive, and she goes and pulls out this box, a Ouija Board box, and then she pulls out a candle, and George said, "Oh, that's the surprise." Apparently her surprise to George was that we would be using a Ouija board in this abandoned house, which didn't sound super fun to me. But I was there for the thrill of the chase Mandy directed George where to park when we got close. It was this really dark street, with no street lights on one side and an open field on the other. The house driveway was gated off, so we had to walk from there. We walked through some woods that led to the backyard of the house. From there, Mandy led us to the back window that she climbed through last time. It was a bit high up, so we had to help the girls up, and we just climbed in ourselves, and we walked around the house for a bit. All of the furniture was still inside, but it was in disrepair. It hadn't been lived in for decades. I'm not easily scared, but being in there at night was quite creepy. It would probably be scary alone. Apart from our footsteps on the creaky floors, it was dead silent. There were some old portraits of people hung on the wall that looked like they were taken in the 1950s, which made me wonder how old this house was and what the story behind it was. It was most likely that the couple who lived there died, and there was no family left to claim the house. Mandy arranged the board on the floor and lighted the candles. I could tell she was enjoying it because she took the initiative and asked a slew of spiritual questions to the planchette. The piece didn't move for the first few questions as she kept asking, "Is anyone there? Can anyone hear?" Etc. Eventually, it started to spell out the word hello. I left and looked at George, who left back. But the girls were serious and even said stop laughing out of respect. I did stop smiling and put a serious face on Mandy, asked what's your name, and the planchette moved around the board slowly to spell out the name, Gregory. She then asked how long have you been dead, and then it moved around to spell out 30 years. I didn't believe it for a second since I knew Mandy or Carly were doing it. This went on for a while and we played along until there was a tremendous bang from upstairs in the house, and we all jumped and released go of the planchette. George stated that there is someone out there, and Mandy claimed that it may be Gregory. Mandy and Carly returned their hands to the plant root and questioned Gregory, "Did you make that sound?" George and I stopped her and said we needed to go if someone was upstairs, and we watched as the planchette moved to the word yes at this point. George and I were certain the girls were playing a joke on us and that they had someone upstairs scaring us when we heard footsteps above us. There was no doubting these noises were footsteps. George and I agreed to walk upstairs and investigate, expecting to discover someone attempting to prank us. The girls kept yelling, "No, come back down," but we climbed up the terribly creaking steps and opened the first open door, which turned out to be a bedroom. The furniture and everything in the room were severely deteriorated, and there was this door in the corner of the room that was cracked open, most likely a closet, and we whispered to each other that we believed we heard something in the closet. I put my finger to my lips to tell him to be quiet, and we listened. When we heard a clear exhale behind the door, we both quickly left the room. We hurried downstairs, expecting to find the girls still in the living room, but they were gone. The candles, the Ouija board, everything there was just darkness. In the house now, he didn't even hear them sneak out. We left through the window again in a hurry and ran to the car. George tried calling Mandy's phone multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail every time she blocked him. They were nowhere to be found either. We went straight to the car and drove home. George never heard from that girl again. He only hung out with her 2 times. He didn't know where she lived or anything. We did form our own crazy theory that they were in fact trying to trap us somehow, and the footsteps upstairs were from somebody they knew. It's also possible they never left the house and that they were hiding somewhere inside. The more superstitious out there may believe that we did in fact speak to a spirit though, and something more supernatural was going on. In October of 2015, when I was a junior in high school, I was in my horror phase where I was obsessed with everything scary and supernatural. With Halloween approaching, I was also reading a lot of scary stories about Ouija boards and people's experiences with them. My curiosity was piqued, so I ordered a Ouija board off Amazon, and when it arrived, I waited until a night when our parents were not home to use it, and I convinced my little sister to try it with me. We were at the dining room table with the lights dimmed, both of us holding the planchette. I asked the board some questions, and my sister and I both left because it was awkward and funny. I began to move the piece around, trying to creep out my sister, but she knew it was me doing it. After a few minutes, we were getting bored, and my sister wanted to stop. I said, "Let's try for a few more minutes of waiting for the planchette to move from some unseen entity." We decided to give up. My sister went to her room, and I went to mine. I looked up more Ouija board stories online and kept reading people's experiences with them. And then I looked up why it didn't work for us. Other people had said it was their first time using Ouija boards, and nothing had happened. So I decided to try again that night at 1 a.m., when my sister was already asleep. I returned to the dining room and lowered the lights once again. I attempted to use the Ouija board once more, but this time in a softer voice so as not to wake up my sister. I held the planchette with both hands, waiting for it to move, but it never did. Instead, I heard soft footsteps upstairs, which could have been my sister. She might have heard me down here. The soft footsteps were followed by a muffled female voice that didn't sound quite like my sister, but it was coming from directly above me. The room above the dining room was our elder brother's room, who was away at college. My sister would not have been up there. I climbed up the stairs gently, and the voice became louder as I got closer to my brother's room. It was coming from in there. I was curious if my sister was playing a prank on me by changing her voice to sound lower to scare me, so I went to the door and put my ear up against it and heard the voice of what sounded like an older woman. I wasn't sure how my sister could be doing a voice like that. At first, I didn't know what was being said until I realized it was the voice of my dead grandma. I felt every hair in my body stand up. I opened the door and switched on the light, but no one was inside. I hurried to my room, slammed the door and locked it, and cuddled up beneath the blankets, feeling the entire room spin as I couldn't form any coherent ideas about what had just happened. It was too real to be imagined. After I calmed down and said a prayer before going to sleep, or at least attempting to sleep, I remained up all night. I remember this night just as clearly 8 years later.